Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 28. Her refusal, though unexpected, did not permanently daunt Claire. His experience of women was great enough for him to be aware that the negative often meant nothing more than the preface to the affirmative, and it was little enough for him not to know that, in the manner of the present negative, there lay a great exception to the dalliance of coyness. That she had already permitted him to make love to her, he read as an additional assurance, not fully trowing that in the fields and pastures to sigh gratis is by no means deemed waste. Love-making being here more often accepted inconsiderately and for its own sweet sake, than in the carking, anxious homes of the ambitious, where a girl's craving for establishment paralyzes her healthy thought of a passion as an end. Tess, why did you say no in such a positive way? He asked her in the course of a few days. She started. Don't ask me. I told you, partly. I am not good enough, not worthy enough. How? Not fine lady enough. Yes, something like that, murmured she. Your friends would scorn me. Indeed, you mistake them, my father and mother. As for my brothers, I don't care. He clasped his fingers behind her back to keep her from slipping away. Now, you did not mean it, sweet. I am sure you did not. You have made me so restless that I cannot read, or play, or do anything. I am in no hurry, Tess, but I want to know, to hear from your own warm lips, that you will, someday, be mine. Any time you may choose, but someday. She could only shake her head and look away from him. Claire regarded her attentively, conned the characters of her face as if they had been hieroglyphics. The denial seemed real. Then I ought not to hold you in this way, ought I? I have no right to you, no right to seek out where you are or to walk with you. Honestly, Tess, do you love any other man? How can you ask? She said, with continued self-suppression. I almost know that you do not, but then why do you repulse me? I don't repulse you. I like you too. Tell me you love me, and you may always tell me so as you go about with me, and never offend me. But you will not accept me as a husband. Ah, that is different. It is for your good, indeed, my dearest. Oh, believe me, it is only for your sake. I don't like to give myself the great happiness of promising to be yours in that way, because I am sure I ought not to do it. But you will make me happy. The struggle was so fearful. Her own heart was so strongly on the side of his. Two ardent hearts against one poor little conscience, that she tried to fortify her resolution by every means in her power. She had come to Tapathy's with a made-up mind. On no account could she agree to a step which might afterwards cause bitter ruin to her husband for his blindness in wedding her. And she held that what her conscience had decided for her, when her mind was unbiased, ought not to be overruled now. "Why don't somebody tell him all about me?" she said. "It was only 40 miles off. Why hasn't it reached here? Somebody must know." Yet nobody seemed to know. Nobody told him. For 2 or 3 days, no more was said. She guessed from the sad countenances of her chamber companions that they had regarded her not only as the favourite, but as the chosen. But they could see for themselves that she did not put herself in this way. Tess had never before known a time in which the thread of her life was so distinctly twisted to 2 strands, positive pleasure and positive pain. At the next cheese-making, the pair were again left alone together. The dairyman himself had been lending a hand, but Mr. Crick, as well as his wife, seemed latterly to have acquired a suspicion of mutual interest between these 2, though they walked so circumspectly that suspicion was but of the faintest. Anyhow, the dairyman left them to themselves. They were breaking up the masses of curd before putting them into the vats. The operation resembled to the act of crumbling bread on a large scale, and amid the immaculate whiteness of the curds, Tess Durbeyfield's hands showed themselves of the pinkness of the rose. Angel, who was filling the vats with his handfuls, suddenly ceased and laid his hands flat upon hers. Her sleeves were rolled far above the elbow, and bending lower, he kissed the inside vein of her soft arm. Although the early September weather was sultry, her arm, from her dabbling in the curds, was as cold and damp to his mouth as a new-gathered mushroom, and tasted of the way. But she was such a sheaf of susceptibilities that her pulse was accelerated by the touch, her blood driven to her finger ends, and the cool arms flushed hot. Then, as though her heart had said, "Is coyness longer necessary? Truth is truth between man and expressed dissent in loving satire, looking into her face. My Tess has, no doubt, almost as many experiences as that wild convolvulus out there on the garden edge that opened itself this morning for the first time. Tell me anything, but don't use that wretched expression anymore about not being worthy of me. I will try not, and I will give you my reasons tomorrow, next week, say on Sunday. Yes, on Sunday. At last she got away, and did not stop in her retreat till she was in the thicket of pollard willows at the lower side of the barton, where she could be quite unseen. Here Tess flung herself down upon the rustling undergrowth of spear grass as upon a bed, and remained crouching in palpitating misery, broken by momentary shoots of joy, which her fears about the ending could not altogether suppress. In reality, she was drifting into acquiescence. Every seesaw of her breath, every wave of her blood, every pulse singing in her ears, was a voice that joined with nature in revolt against her scrupulousness. Reckless, inconsiderate acceptance of him, to close with him at the altar, revealing nothing, and chancing discovery, to snatch her ripe pleasure before the iron teeth of pain could have time to shut upon her. That was what love counselled, and in almost a terror of ecstasy, Tess divined that, despite her many months of lonely self-chastisement, wrestlings, communings, schemes to lead a future of austere isolation, love's counsel would prevail. The afternoon advanced, and still she remained among the willows. She heard the rattle of taking down the bales from the forked stands, the whoa, whoa, which accompanied the getting together of the cows. But she did not go to the milking. They would see her agitation, and the dairyman, thinking the cause to be love alone, would good-naturedly tease her, and that harassment could not be borne. Her lover must have guessed her overwrought state, and invented some excuse for her non-appearance, for no inquiries were made or calls given. At 6:30, the sun settled down upon the levels, with the aspect of a great forge in the heavens, and presently a monstrous pumpkin-like moon arose on the other hand. The pollard willows, tortured out of their natural shape by incessant choppings, became spiny-haired monsters as they stood up against it. She went in, and upstairs without a light. It was now Wednesday. Thursday came. An angel looked thoughtfully at her from a distance, but intruded in no way upon her. The indoor milkmaids, Marianne and the rest, seemed to guess that something definite was afoot, for they did not force any remarks upon her in the bedchamber. Friday passed. Saturday. Tomorrow was the day. I shall give way. I shall say yes. I shall let myself marry him. I cannot help it, she jealously panted, with her hot face to the pillow, that night, on hearing one of the girls sigh his name in her sleep. I cannot bear to let anybody have him but me. Yet it is a wrong to him, and may kill him when he knows. Oh, my heart. Oh, oh, oh. Chapter 29. Now, who made you think I've heard news o' this morning? Said Dairyman Crick, as he sat down to breakfast next day, with a riddling gaze round upon the munching men and maids return. And has he married the valiant matron's daughter, as he promised? Asked Angel Clare absently, as he turned over the newspaper he was reading at the little table to which he was always banished by Mrs. Crick in her sense of gentility. Not he, sir. Never meant to, replied the dairyman. And that, as I say, 'tis a widow woman, and she had money, it seems, £50 a year or so, and that was all he was after. They were married in a great hurry, and then she told him that by marrying she had lost her £50 a year. Just fancy the state of the gentleman's mind at that news. Never such a cat and dog life as they've been leading ever since. Serves him well, but right. But unluckily, the poor woman gets the worst of it. Well, the silly body should have told him sooner that the ghost of her first man would trouble him, said Mrs. Crick. Yes, yes, responded the dairyman indecisively. Still, you can see exactly how it was. She wanted a home, and didn't think to run the risk of losing him. Don't you think that was something like it, maidens? He glanced towards the row of girls. She ought to have told him just before they went to church, when he could have hardly backed out, exclaimed Marianne. Yes, she ought, agreed Is. She must have seen what he was after, and should have refused him, cried Reddy spasmodically. And what do you say, my dear? Asked the dairyman to Tess. I think she ought to have told him the true state of things, or else refused him. I don't know, replied Tess, the bread and butter choking her. Because if I'd have done either out, said Beck Nibs, a married helper from one of the cottages. All's fair in love and war. I'd have married Anne just as she did, and if he'd said 2 words to me about not telling me beforehand anything whatsoever about my first chap that I hadn't chose to tell, I'd have knocked him down with a rolling pin. A scram little feller like he, any woman could do it. The laughter which followed this sally was supplemented only by a sorry smile, for form's sake, from Tess. What was comedy to them was tragedy to her, and she could hardly bear this mirth. She soon rose from the table, and, with an impression that Clare would follow her, went along a little wriggling path, now stepping to one side of the irrigating channels, and now to the other, till she stood by the main stream of the Var. Men had been cutting the water weeds higher up the river, and masses of them were floating past her, moving islands of green crowfoot on which she might almost have ridden, long locks of which weed had lodged against the piles driven to keep the cows from crossing. Yes, there was the pain of it, the question of a woman telling her story. The heaviest of crosses to herself seemed but amusement to others. It was as if people should laugh at martyrdom. Tessie came from behind her, and Clare sprang across the gully, alighting beside her feet. My wife, soon, I may say. No, no, I cannot. For your sake, oh, Mr. Clare, for your sake, I say no. Tess. Still, I say no, she repeated. Not expecting this, he had put his arm lightly round her waist the moment after speaking, condition of domiciliary comradeship, put her, as the woman, to such disadvantage by its enforced intercourse that he felt it unfair to her to exercise any pressure of blandishment which he might have honestly employed had she been better able to avoid him. He released her momentarily imprisoned waist and withheld the kiss. It all turned on that release. What had given her strength to refuse him this time was solely the tale of the widow told by the dairyman. In that would have been overcome by another moment. But Angel said no more. His face was perplexed. He went away. Day after day they met, somewhat less constantly than before, and thus 2 or 3 weeks went by. The end of September drew near, and she could see in his eye that he might ask her again. His plan of procedure was different now, as though he had made up his mind that her negatives were, after all, only coyness and youth, startled by the novelty of the proposal. The fitful evasiveness of her manner when the subject was under discussion countenanced the idea. So he played a more coaxing game, and while never going beyond words or attempting the renewal of caresses, he did his utmost orally. In this way, Claire persistently wooed her in undertones like that of her purling milk, at the cow's side, at skimmings, at butter makings, at cheese makings, among broody poultry, and among farrowing pigs, as no milkmaid was ever wooed before by such a man. Tess knew that she must break down. Neither a religious sense of a certain moral validity in the previous union, nor a conscientious wish for candour could hold out against it much longer. She loved him so passionately, and he was so godlike in her eyes, and being, though untrained, instinctively refined, her nature cried for his tutelary guidance. And thus, though Tess kept repeating to herself, "I can never be his wife," the words were vain. A proof of her weakness lay in the very utterance of what calm strength would not have taken the trouble to formulate. Every sound of his voice, beginning on the old subject, stirred with a terrifying bliss, and she coveted the recantation she feared. His manner was, what man's is not, so much that of one who would love and cherish and defend her under any conditions, changes, charges, or revelations, that her gloom lessened as she basked in it. The season, meanwhile, was drawing onward to the equinox, and though it was still fine, the days were much shorter. The dairy had again worked by morning candlelight for a long time, and a fresh renewal of Claire's bleeding occurred one morning between 3 and 4. She had run up in her bedgown to his door to call him as usual, then had gone back down to dress and call the others, and in 10 minutes was walking to the head of the stairs with the candle in her hand. At the same moment he came down his steps from above his shirt sleeves and put his arm across the stairway. "Now, Miss Flirt, before you go down," he said peremptorily, "it is a fortnight since I spoke, and this won't do any longer. You must tell me what you mean, or I shall have to leave this house. My door was ajar just now, and I saw you. For your own safety I must go. You don't know. Well, is it to be a yes at last?" "I'm only just up, Mr. Clare, and it is too early to take me to task," she pouted. "You need not call me Flirt. 'Tis cruel and untrue. Wait till by and by. Please wait till by and by. I will really think seriously about it between now and then. Let me go downstairs." She looked a shade like what he had said she was as, holding the candle sideways, she tried to smile away the seriousness of her words. Call me Angel then, and not Mr. Clare. Angel. Angel, dearest, why not? 'Twould mean that I agree, wouldn't it? It would only mean that you love me, even if you cannot marry me, and you were so good as to own that long ago. Very well then, Angel dearest, if I must, she murmured, looking at her candle, a roguish curl coming upon her mouth, notwithstanding her suspense. Clare had resolved never to kiss her until he had obtained her promise. But somehow, as Tess stood there in her prettily tucked up milking gown, her hair carelessly heaped upon her head, till there should be leisure to arrange it when skimming and milking were done, he broke his resolve and brought his lips to her cheek for one moment. She passed downstairs very quickly, never looking back at him or saying another word. The other maids were already down, and the subject was not pursued. Except Marianne, they all looked wistfully and suspiciously at the pair. In the sad yellow rays which the morning candles emitted, in contrast with the first cold signals of the dawn without. When skimming was done, which, as the milking diminished with the approach of autumn, was a lessening process day by day, Reddy and the rest went out. The lovers followed them. Our tremulous lives are so different from theirs, are they not? He musingly observed to her, as he regarded the three figures tripping before him through the frigid pallor of opening day. Not so very different, I think, she said. Why do you think that? There be very few women's lives that are not tremulous, Tess replied, pausing over the new word, as if it impressed her. There's more in those three than you think. What is in them? Almost either of them, she began, perhaps would make a properer wife than I, and perhaps they love you as well as I, almost. Oh, Tessie! There were signs that it was an inquisitive relief to her to hear the impatient exclamation, though she had resolved so intrepidly to let generosity make one bid against herself. This was now done, that was now done, and she had not the power to attempt self-immolation a second time then. They were joined by a milker from one of the cottages, and no more was said on that which concerned them so deeply. But Tess knew that this day would decide it. In the afternoon, several of the dairyman's household and assistants went down to the meads as usual, a long way from the dairy, where many of the cows were milked without being driven home. The supply was getting less as the animals were advancing in calf, and the supernumerary milkers of the lush green season had been dismissed. The work progressed leisurely. Each pailful was poured into tall cans that stood in a large spring wagon, which had been brought upon the scene, and when they were milked, the cows trailed away. Dairyman Craig, who was there with the rest, his wrapper gleaming miraculously white against the leaden evening sky, suddenly looked at his heavy watch. Why, 'tis later than I thought, he said. Begad, we shan't be soon enough with this milk at the station if we don't mind. There's no time today to take it home and mix it with the bulk afore sending off. It must go to the station straight from here. Who'll drive it across? Mr. Clare volunteered to do so, though it was none of his business, asking Tess to accompany him. The evening, though sunless, had been warm and muggy for the season, and Tess had come out with her milking cud only, naked-armed and jacketless, certainly not dressed for a drive. She therefore replied by glancing over her scant habiliments, but Claire gently urged her. She assented by relinquishing her pail, and stole to the dairyman to take home, and mounted the spring wagon beside Claire. Chapter 13. In the diminishing daylight, they went along the level roadway through the meads, which stretched away into the grey miles, and were packed in the extreme edge of distance by the swarthy, abrupt slopes of Egdon Heath. On its summit stood clumps and stretches of fir trees, whose notched tips appeared like battlemented towers, crowning black-fronted castles of enchantment. They were so absorbed in the sense of being close to each other that they did not begin talking for a long while, the silence being broken only by the clucking of the milk in the tall cans behind them. The lane they followed was so solitary that the hazelnuts had remained on the boughs till they slipped from their shells, and the blackberries hung in heavy clusters. Every now and then, Angel would fling the lash of his whip round one of these, pluck it off, and give it to his companion. The dull sky soon began to tell its meaning by sending down herald drops of rain, and the stagnant air of the day changed into a fitful breeze which played about their faces. The quicksilvery glaze on the rivers and pools vanished. From broad mirrors of light they changed to lustreless sheets of lead, with a surface like a rasp. But that spectacle did not affect her preoccupation. Her countenance, in natural carnation, slightly embrowned by the season, deepened on the cheeks with the beating of the raindrops, and a portion of her hair, which the pressure of the cow's flanks had, as usual, caused to tumble down from its fastenings, hung below the curtain of her calico bonnet. The rain began to make it clammy, till it hardly was better than seaweed. "I ought not to have come, I suppose," she murmured, looking at the sky. "I am sorry for the rain," said he, "but how glad I am to have you here." Remote Egdon disappeared by degrees behind the liquid gauze. The evening grew darker, and the roads being crossed by gates, it was not safe to drive faster than at a walking pace. The air was rather chill. "I am so afraid you will get cold, with nothing upon your arms and shoulders," he said. "Creep close to me, and perhaps the drizzle won't hurt you much. I should be sorrier still if I did not think that the rain might be helping me." She imperceptibly crept closer, and he wrapped round them both a large piece of sailcloth, which was sometimes used to keep the sun off the milking cans. Tess held it from slipping off him as well as herself, Claire's hands being occupied. "Now we are all right again." "Ah, no, we are not. It runs down into my neck a little, and it must still more into yours. That's better. Your arms are like wet marble, Tess. Wipe them in the cloth. Now, if you stay quiet, you will not get another drop. Well, dear, about that question of mine, that long-standing question." The only reply that he could hear for a little while was the smack of the horses' hoofs on the moistening road, and the cluck of the milk in the cans behind them. "Do you remember what you said?" "I do," she replied. "Before we get home, mind." "I'll try." He said no more then, as they drove. The fragment of an old manor house of Caroline date rose against the sky, and was in due course passed and left behind. "That," he observed to entertain her, "is an interesting old place, one of the several seats which belonged to an ancient Norman family, pass one of their residences without thinking of them. There's something very sad in the extinction of a family of renown, even if it was fierce, domineering, feudal renown. Yes, said Tess. They crept along towards a point in the expanse of shade before them, at which a feeble light was beginning to assert its presence, a spot where, by day, a fitful white streak of stream at intervals upon the dark green background denoted the intermittent moments of contact between their secluded world and modern life. Modern life stretched out its steam feeler to this point 3 or 4 times a day, touched the native existences, and quickly withdrew its feeler again, as if what it touched had been uncongenial. They reached the feeble light, which came from the smoky lamp of a little railway station, a poor enough terrestrial star, yet, in one sense, of more importance to telepathy's theory and mankind than the celestial ones, to which it stood in such humiliating contrast. The cans of new milk were unladen in the rain, Tess getting a little shelter from a neighbouring holly tree. Then there was the hissing of a train, which drew up almost silently upon the wet rails, and the milk was rapidly swung, can by can, into the truck. The light of the engine flashed for a second upon Tess Durbefield's figure, motionless under the great holly tree. No object could have looked more foreign to the gleaming cranks and wheels than this unsophisticated girl, with the round, bare arms, the rainy face and hair, the suspended attitude of a friendly leopard at pause, the print gown of no date or fashion, and the cotton bonnet drooping on her brow. She mounted again beside her lover with a mute obedience characteristic of impassioned natures at times, and when they had wrapped themselves up overhead and ears in the sailcloth again, they plunged back into the now thick night. Tess was so susceptible that the few minutes of contact with the whirl of material progress lingered in her thought. Londoners will drink it at their breakfasts tomorrow, won't they? She asked. Strange people that we have never seen. Yes, I suppose they will, though not as we send it, when its strength has been lowered so that it may not get up into their heads. Noble men and noble women, ambassadors and centurions, ladies and tradeswomen, and babies who have never seen a cow. Well, yes, perhaps, particularly centurions, who don't know anything of us and where it comes from, or think how we too drove miles across the moor tonight in the rain that it might reach them in time. We did not drive entirely on account of these precious Londoners. We drove a little on our own, on account of that anxious matter which you will, I am sure, set at rest, dear Tess. Now, permit me to put it in this way. You belong to me already, you know. Your heart, I mean, does it not? You know as well as I. Oh, yes, yes. Then, if your heart does, why not your hand? My only reason was on account of you, on account of a question. I have something to tell you. But suppose it to be entirely for my happiness, and my worldly convenience also. Oh yes, if it is for your happiness and worldly convenience. But my last experiences, I want, well, it is for my convenience, as well as my happiness. If I have a very large farm, either English or colonial, you will be invaluable as a wife to me, better than a woman out of the largest mansion in the country. So please, dear Tessie, disabuse your mind of the feeling that you will stand in my way. But my history. I want you to know it. You must let me tell you. You will not like me so well. Tell it if you wish to, dearest. This precious history, then. Yes, I was born at so-and-so, Anno Domini. I was born at Marlow, she said, catching at his words as I help, lightly as they were spoken, and I grew up there, and I was in the 6th standard when I left school, and they said I had great aptness, and should make a good teacher, so it was settled that I should be one, but there was trouble in my family. My father was not very industrious, and he drank little. Yes, yes, poor child. Nothing new. He pressed her more closely to his side. And then, there's something very peculiar about it. About me. Tess's breath quickened. Yes, dearest, never mind. I'm not a D'Urberville, but a d'Urberville, a descendant of the same family as those who owned the old house we passed. And we are all gone to nothing. A D'Urberville, indeed. And is that all the trouble, dear Tess? Yes, she answered faintly. Well, why should I love you less after knowing this? I was told by the dairyman that you hated old families. He laughed. Well, it is true in one sense. I do hate the aristocratic principle of blood before everything, and do think that, as reasoners, the only pedigrees we ought to respect are those spiritual ones of the wise and virtuous, without regard to corporal paternity. But I am extremely interested in this news. You can have no idea how interested I am. Are you not interested yourself in being one of that well-known line? No, I have thought it sad, especially since coming here, and knowing that many of the hills and fields I see once belonged to my father's people, but other hills and fields belonged to Reddy's people, and perhaps others of Marianne's, so that I don't value it particularly. Yes, it is surprising how many of the present tillers of the soil were once owners of it, and I sometimes wonder that a certain school of politicians don't make capital of the circumstance, but they don't seem to know it. I wonder that I did not see the resemblance of your name to D'Urberville, and trace the manifest corruption, and that was the corking secret. She had not told. At the last moment, her courage had failed her. She feared his blame for not telling him sooner, and her instinct of self-preservation was stronger than her candour. Of course, continued the unwitting Claire, I should have been glad to know you to be descended exclusively from the long-suffering, dumb, unrecorded rank and file of the English nation, and not from the self-seeking few who made themselves powerful at the expense of the rest. But I am corrupted away from that by my affection for you, Tess. He laughed as he spoke, and made selfish likewise. For your own sake, I rejoice in your descent. Society is hopelessly snobbish, and the fact that your extraction may make an appreciable difference to its acceptance of you as my wife. After I have made you the well-read woman that I mean to make you, my mother, too, poor soul, will think so much better of you on account of it. Tess, you must spell your name correctly, D'Urberville, from this very day. I like the other way rather best. But you must, dearest. Good heavens, why dozens of mushroom millionaires would jump at such a possession. By the by, there is one of that kidney who has taken the name. Where have I heard of him? Up in the neighbourhood of the Chase, I think. Why, he is the very man who had the rumpus with my father I told you of. What an odd coincidence. Angel, I think I would rather not take the name. It is unlucky, perhaps. She was agitated. Now then, Mistress Teresa d'Urberville, I have you. Take my name, and so you will escape yours. The secret is out, marry me very, very much? I do, dearest, of course. I mean that it is only your wanting me very much and being hardly able to keep alive without me, whatever my offences, that would make me feel I ought to say I will. You will. You do say it. I know. You will be mine forever and ever. He clasped her close and kissed her. Yes. She had no sooner said it than she burst into a dry, hard sobbing, so violent that it seemed to rend her. Tess was not a hysterical girl by any means, and he was surprised. Why do you cry, dearest? I can't tell. Quite. I'm so glad to think of being yours and making you happy. But this does not seem very much like gladness, my Tessie. I mean, I cry because I've broken down in my vow. I said I would die unmarried. But if you love me, you would like me to be your husband. Yes, yes, yes. But, oh, I sometimes wish I had never been born. Now, my dear Tess, if I did not know that you were very much excited and very inexperienced, I should say that remark was not very complimentary. How came you to wish that if you care for me? Do you care for me? I wish you would prove it in some way. How can I prove it more than I have done? She cried, in a distraction of tenderness. Will this prove it more? She clasped his neck, and for the first time Claire learned what an impassioned woman's kisses were like upon the lips of one whom she loved with all her heart and soul, as Tess loved him. There, now do you believe? She asked, flushed and wiping her eyes. Yes, I never really doubted. Never, never. So, they drove on through the gloom of forming one bundle inside the sailcloth, the horse going as he would, and the rain driving against them. She had consented. She might as well have agreed at first. The appetite for joy, which pervades all creation, that tremendous force which says humanity to its purpose, as the tide sways the helpless weed, was not to be controlled by vague lubrications over the social rubric. I must write to my mother, she said. You don't mind my doing that? Of course not, dear child. You are child to me, Tess, not to know how very proper it is to write to your mother at such a time, and how wrong it would be in me to object. Where does she live? At the same place, Marlow, on the farther side of Blackmore Vale. Ah, then I have seen you before this summer. Yes, at that dance on the green, but you would not dance with me. Oh, I hope that is of no ill omen for us now.